At the end of the day, when somebody is that contradictory, what it comes down to for Joe, how he makes voting decisions, is vibes. And I am waging war on vibes-based voters because it's not tenable and it's not serious. And there's zero paying attention to the extremism of Trump, the extremism of Republicans. Now he's cocooned himself in a right-wing echo chamber. I don't know if you saw this, but recently he said he's going to go to Mar-a-Lago to do some podcasts and Trump may pop in every now and then. And it's like, could you imagine if a comedian was like, I'm going to go hang out with Joe Biden at his vacation house in Delaware on Rehoboth Beach, and maybe he'll pop in every now and then. He would get roasted. Everybody would say that guy is a hack, not a comedian, not funny, loser, snuggling up to power. So that's why I said he's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin.
But let's get into Kyle Kulinski with our good friend Josiah from Pondering Politics.
Yeah, this is a great clip. And honestly, man, I think that Kyle Kulinski is just straight up on a mission to destroy Joe Rogan, to take him down once and for all and expose this man. I think Kyle genuinely must be harboring some level of guilt for, like, I don't know, whitewashing Joe Rogan.
He defended him a lot.
He defended him a lot, including against some pretty aggressive criticism that has aged well. And I'm not taking a shot at Kyle. I think he's a man. He's doing what he needs to do in order to correct the record clearly. But he's going hard. He's going hard in the paint, day after day, almost twice a week, 3 times a week now. He uploads a video about Joe.
Joe Rogan is his Cenk Uygur. Let me tell you what, Joe, he has his sights set on Joe. We've got our sights set on Cenk, and the left is ready to take over.
Yep. Either way, this is a clip from Kyle on Josiah's show, Pondering Politics. Recently had a conversation. Highly recommend you guys watch the entirety of it. But in this segment, Josiah brings up the beef and asks Kyle to expound a little bit on his relationship with Joe Rogan. Interesting tidbits here.
And on that topic, you recently took a swing at metaphorically at a guy who I thought used to be a buddy of yours. You were on his show multiple times, Joe Rogan. So let's start there. So you called Joe Rogan out. Rogan is fake independent media, barely a comedian anymore, and he's morphed into state media for Trump. He's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin. Man, you were feeling your spice that day. And then he responded to you. He said, former podcast guest here. And so did you see that?
So to be fair, that wasn't him. That's a fan account.
Oh, damn. Yeah. Was it really?
Yeah, gotcha. But it's one of the bigger ones. So gotcha. A lot of people thought it was him.
Yeah, I saw that too. And I'm like, oh shit. Okay. So
yeah.
Do you think that bridge is torched between you and Rogan? Because I haven't seen you on in a couple of years, and you were on multiple times.
Well, yeah. So a couple things. First of all, I'm a very introverted guy, contrary to popular belief. And whenever I have to go anywhere, my reaction is like, oh, I gotta go somewhere. I'm one of those guys. So like, I went on because it was a cool thing to do, and I did it 4 times or whatever the hell it was. But every time towards the end, it almost felt like a chore. Like, oh, I got to go do this thing. God damn it. So I really don't care about getting on that platform. In terms of
what a flex too, because Kyle's like, I went on during the golden era of the Joe Rogan podcast, guys. I did it 4 times. I hate airplanes. I had to drive with my boy Corin all the way from New York to California and back again. That is a marathon drive. I'll tell you what, I've driven from Kansas City to Boston. I've driven, from Kansas City to Austin. I've driven from Kansas City to Los Angeles. Doing both Los Angeles to Kansas City and Kansas City to Boston in one haul, like, that shit.
Bridge being burnt. Don't know. Don't really care, because what's happened to him is humiliating and it's pathetic. I mean, he's sort of a classic example of what happens when you do politics by vibes, when you don't do any homework whatsoever and know anything about the policies. And I think the reason I'm so hard on him is because he knows better. He sat across the table from me when I was making not only left-wing arguments, but making anti-Trump arguments to his face. And he would nod along in agreement. And he would regurgitate similar arguments to other podcast guests. There's a famous clip of him ranting against the hardliners on immigration to Duncan Trussell. There's that famous compilation of him saying all these left-wing things. I want universal health care, and I want free college, and I want this, and I want that, higher wages. And then, like, for you to go from Bernie in 2016 or 2020, I think 2020, and then go
It was 2020.
to Donald Trump in 2024. I don't buy this idea of like, oh, we should all be the Joe Rogan whisperer and like be really nice to him to try to get him back to our side. No, fuck that. I was the guy who, before anybody else was even paying attention, I was holding his hand and walking him through it slowly and explaining it to him like he was a fucking child.
Come on,
and he
Joe.
would nod along in
Joe,
agreement.
come on, buddy. Come on, don't be scared. Come on.
And then, you know, when I'm gone, then Ben Shapiro comes on a couple weeks later and he nods along in agreement to Ben Shapiro. And Steven Crowder comes on and he nods along in agreement with Steven Crowder. And then this fucking asshole comes on and that fucking asshole comes on. So the bottom line is he's a contradictory character. And he'll vibe with, mostly 95% of the time, he'll vibe with whoever he's sitting across from. But there is no ideological core. At the end of the day, when somebody is that contradictory, what it comes down to for Joe, how he makes voting decisions, is vibes. And I am waging war on vibes-based voters because it's not tenable and it's not serious. And people need to be better than that. And they owe it to themselves to be better than that. Because if you vote for people who are going to fucking destroy the country, and then 20 years from now, you look back like, damn, I probably shouldn't have cast that vote. Yeah, well, there's those of us all along who've been warning you to not go in that direction. So with Trump in particular, he likes the vibe. I think he's anti-establishment. I think he's anti-elite. I think he's anti-corruption and pro-worker and anti-war. Literally every single one of those things is verifiably untrue, and it doesn't take long to debunk it. And there's zero paying attention to the extremism of Trump, the extremism of Republicans. Now he's cocooned himself in a right-wing echo chamber. I don't know if you saw this, but recently he said he's going to go to Mar-a-Lago to do some podcasts, and Trump may pop in every now and then. And it's like, could you imagine if a comedian was like, I'm going to go hang out with Joe Biden at his vacation house in Delaware on Rehoboth Beach, and maybe he'll pop in every now and then. He would get roasted. Everybody would say that guy is a fucking hack, not a comedian, not funny, loser, snuggling up to power. So that's why I said he's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin. George Carlin very famously said, I punch up, I don't punch down. What's Joe doing? Going full Rush Limbaugh, where he's basically a right-wing radio host now, where every show is here. Jiu-jitsu move, let me tell you the 78 ways in which I think Democrats are actually worse than Republicans on absolutely everything, even though I have zero policies to back that up. So yeah.
Woo. Yeah, that's so true from Kyle. And it's an amazing point that, yeah, if any left-wing comedian started hanging out in Joe Biden's inner circle or Kamala Harris's inner circle, let alone at their actual residence, at their crib, doing podcasts together, hanging out, you know, what's up, buddy? Everyone would think it was the most pathetic shit of all time. The most pathetic shit of all time. But somehow Joe Rogan gets a pass from all of his stupid followers, all these idiots in his audience that want to act like he's anti-establishment. He's a populist.
Bro, do you know what's even worse than that? It breaks my brain because, again, I listened to Joe Rogan at I think the best time to ever do it, which was like 2015 to 2019. Those were 4 really good years. It wasn't like an obscure internet podcast at that point. It had a really big following, but he hadn't mainstreamed and gone crazy. And one of the things that was really important to Joe throughout that entire time period was comedy, respecting comedy. Even though the dude is not good at it, he's a bad comedian. You have to respect how much effort he put into trying to become a good one. And one thing that he would constantly rail against that I found refreshing was he would talk about how the lazy political comedy was so insincere. It was so cringe. It didn't land. When Alec Baldwin went up there and impersonated Trump over and over again, it got stale quickly, even if it was funny at first, right? We have this kind of like who's the blonde lady that's kind of chubby that everybody liked to malign? She's like a horrible comedian. And no, Amy Schumer, I think. Schumer, yeah. And she would do the oh, I'm a feminist, and like the applause line's supposed to come when you
pussy
say,
smells like a barnyard.
Hillary, shut up, wine. And it's just like, that's not comedy, right? You're not saying anything funny. You're just a bunch of clapping seals who are saying shit to get an audience response, right? You're just going after the pantsuit nation, the pink pussy hat wearers, the women's marchers, right? Fine. That's your demographic. You're preaching to them. You're doing live performance art for them, but it's not stand-up comedy, right? It's something else entirely. Well, he would also be pretty consistent and not ever celebrate the Greg Gutfelds of the world, okay? And he would sometimes betray his principles by entertaining the guys like Jim Brewer, but Jim Brewer was actually kind of funny back on SNL back in the day.
Really?
I mean, people say that. I don't fucking know. I never watched him back on.
I didn't even know he was ever on SNL.
I'm pretty sure he was on SNL back in the day. I'm pretty sure he was like a 90s SNL cast member. Anyway, I was trying to be nice when I said that, right? Anyway, long story short, he had a sense of like, oh, respectability about him. He like cares about comedy. Now he's doing the exact same thing. He's down at a safe space in Austin, Texas, where they're just doing laugh lines about how Kamala Harris is cringe and how Puerto Rico is garbage and how, left wingers would be their concubines if there was justice in this world. You know what I mean? That's essentially, that's essentially the punchlines that they're going after. It's basically like they're just feeding talking points to their audience with a kind of delivery and calling it stand-up comedy. It's the exact inversion of what people did in the wake of the Hillary Clinton stuff.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Kyle also recently published a video going after Rogan for another stupid thing that Joe Rogan said. But before we look at that, I also wanted to show you guys this just to prove my point about the war path that Kyle is on right now. If you just type in Joe Rogan to his YouTube, look at all these videos he's done about Rogan. Rogan reveals the real reason he went full MAGA. That's the one we're about to watch. Kyle reacts. Joe Rogan glazes Trump for 3 hours straight. Did Joe Rogan win the election for Trump? Joe Rogan admits Trump lied to his face. I like him. Joe Rogan meat rides Trump relentlessly. And by the way, I think another part of the reason why Kyle's making so many videos like this is because they're doing pretty well views-wise. These videos are doing quite well when it comes to their view count. This one got 500,000. So of course he's going to keep beating this drum. Luckily, I think it's actually a really important and valuable service that Kyle's doing. I'm glad it's, getting the clicks and getting the attention he wants, but also this is really important stuff. It's good that these videos are out here and that potential members of Rogan's audience could stumble across them, because as you're about to see, Kyle brings the facts.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it's totally true that it's an important service, because we've noticed this too. If you put Joe Rogan in your headline, he's such a mammoth figure, okay, that the SEO is going to promote it. Okay, you're going to reach more mainstream demographics. We had a clip one time of us talking to Emma Vigeland. Shout out to Emma, friend of the show. And we just randomly got it out. It hit the algorithm and it did like 300,000 views. It was like one of the first videos we had that ever blew up like crazy like that. Now, if you're Kyle Kulinski and you're the kind of guy who has been on Joe Rogan, so people are like, oh, I remember that guy. He was on Rogan. Oh, now he's nuking Rogan. Oh, shit. What does he have to say? And then you actually have to hear Joe Rogan argue with himself, like that clip that he put together. Or I don't even think it was a clip. I think it was just, the conversation of Joe Rogan and Duncan Trussell, and he tweeted it out or something. But it was so obvious that Joe Rogan had abandoned all of his principles, that he'd moved so far from his compassionate human side into his like oligarchic sympathizing side. Like, oh, now you are an out of touch aristocrat, and it couldn't be more clear, forcing his audience to grapple with that and hearing it from a guy who, dare I say, loved Joe Rogan. Guys, if you watch Kyle's first appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, his smile's glued to his face. He cannot believe where he's sitting. Joe Rogan's like makes an offhanded comment about how, oh yeah, like I guess a lot of people know who I am. And Kyle's like, everybody in my generation knows who you are. And you can watch it, and he's like a kid in Disneyland, man. It's awesome. It's fun to watch. It was infectious, and it was cool to see a lefty actually, make it to that level. And also, I'm not standing by the fact that Jim Brewer's done anything funny in the last 25 years. I'm saying maybe in the 90s he hit the nail on the head a few times. Okay, maybe he maybe he stole a Norm Macdonald joke and actually, and accidentally delivered it in a way that worked. I don't know.
Zach is a huge fan of Jim Brewer.
I'm getting the vaccine chase. I'm Jim Brewer. No, that guy makes Roseanne Barr look hilarious.
To be fair, I think I've actually defended Brewer on the show a couple times. Not just like, in general, but
the Jim Brewer fan.
I've only defended him in comparison to other right-wing comedians, because I said at least he like puts his back into it. At least he'll hop. What did Tim Wells say about Elon Musk? He's jumping around on the stage like a dipshit.
Yeah,
that's Jim Brewer. At least he'll hop around like a dipshit on the stage. That's my defense of Jim Brewer. Let's take a look.
Welcome to the show. Welcome.
It seems high effort what Jim Brewer does on stage. So anyway, let's take a look here, because this is another video of Kyle Kulinski just absolutely eviscerating and destroying Joe Rogan and his ridiculous hollow ideology. And this Joe Rogan clip also pissed me off, so I can understand where Kyle's coming from.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into it. So Rogan, on one of his recent podcasts, had a moment here where he explained What made him snap and go full MAGA? And as I already pointed out,
One of the things I know about this guest, sorry to cut in already, this is Ari Shafir. You can Google a clip of him talking about how on Joe Rogan, one of his favorite things to do when he lived in Israel was run up and down the streets and scream the N-word.
it is not the thing you're thinking. All right, let's listen.
Well, I wanted to stay out of the presidential election shit.
Yeah,
'cause
what
it's
happened?
gross. Because I feel like I had to. I feel like this is so nuts. This is so nuts. When that Tim Walz guy, it's so nuts that guy was going to be the vice president.
Pretending to be his
You're telling
head
me,
coach.
you're telling me this whole thing's fake. Then you're telling me you don't care if someone's a liar. You don't care if they lied about their military rank, where they served. You don't care if they lie about being an assistant. You don't care if they lie about Tiananmen Square. There's too many things. This is so crazy. You would get fired if you were an assistant manager at a fucking oil changing company.
Yeah.
The number one reason why he flipped and went full MAGA is Tim Walz. And he says because Tim Walz is such a horrible liar. My brother in Christ, you endorsed Donald Trump, who literally told, I believe the exact number is 30,573 lies his first term in office. There was a big Washington Post analysis done, and that's the number they came to. And let me be extra kind here, because I know what Rogan would say. Washington Post is basically fake news at this point. New York Times is basically fake news. They're all fake news. Okay, let's be kind and cut that number in half. Let's cut it in more than half. Let's say he just told 15,000 lies, and the other lies are all ones that, it was a gray area, and they said
They were alternative facts, Kyle. Be real.
it was a lie.
Stop repeating corporate talking points. You're basically MSM at this point. Jeez, wow. Woke Kyle reading the WAPO.
But it couldn't be interpreted as not a lie or whatever. Okay, let's grant all that. 15,000 lies in 4 years, which likely makes him the most prolific liar ever in modern American politics. By the way, Trump lied directly to Joe's face, and Joe knew it. And he didn't care. He didn't care. He said to Joe's face, when my rally crowds would say, lock her up, talking about Hillary, I said, whoa, hold on now. I said, whoa, hold on. So he pretended like lock her up.
That is like the most transparent lie, too, because that was Trump's favorite thing ever. If you watch the 2015 to 2016 portion of the Republican primary, I mean, even up all the way to the end, but the real raw Trump, when he was just feeling himself from the Trump, he would lampoon Hillary Clinton. He would talk about how she was an absolute criminal. He would not shut the fuck up about her emails and the files and all of this kind of shit, okay? Because he knew it would rally up his base. To act like he was somehow against the criminalization of his political opponents is asinine. It's ludicrous, right? And also, if you want to compare the severity of his lies, you want to, criticize Tim Walz, a guy who actually did serve in the military for, you lied about your record. Donald Trump lied about having bone spurs, okay? He literally lied about not being able to serve, or having medical disabilities that would prevent him from serving, so that poor kids would have to die in his place because his rich daddy could get him out of the wars. Meanwhile, then he's going to turn around and admonish people who had to turn around and go out and get shipped to Vietnam, or people who did decide to serve in the military. And one thing that I always like to iron out and make very clear, Gavin and I have deep problems with the United States military. We are 100% anti-war. I'm 100% anti-military, but I'm pro-veterans. And Donald Trump has continued to fuck veterans. And that's another thing that Joe Rogan claims to care so much about. Jesus Christ.
Wasn't one of his campaign slogans, and wasn't something he said on a regular basis. We've showed the compilations on this channel. We showed you the compilations of Trump repeatedly saying, lock her up, talking about Hillary Clinton. You think Rogan doesn't know that Trump said lock her up? He knows that. Another part, he lied directly to his face, talking about the trying to overturn the last election, talking about election fraud, talking about how he thinks he won the 2020 election. And Rogan said, let me ask you about that. And by the way, I'm going to give you space. Nobody lets you finish talking on this, so I'm going to back up and let you and give you the floor so that you can, make your whole case. And of course, he made the dumbest fucking case imaginable. Of course, it was a lie that he won the 2020. Are you kidding me? They literally did an audit in the state of Arizona, and Biden won by more than what we thought he won by on election day. Every one of their
Or talk about the vaccine, something that Joe Rogan went to the mattresses over, man. He went scorched earth on mainstream media. He waged a war and he dug a trench, man, and he's always been considered fringe and fucking alternative since then. Do you know who was president during Operation Warp Speed? Do you know who made the vaccine? It was Donald Trump. And we also played a video of Kamala Harris initially being kind of skeptical, like, oh, I don't want to take a vaccine that Donald Trump makes. And then all of everyone came out and was like, shut the fuck up. Donald Trump isn't making this vaccine, but he is the one that is like, you know, politically motivating it, like it will be safe, all that shit, right? Joe Rogan, none of that nuance, doesn't push back on him at all, doesn't talk about if he has any regrets, doesn't ask him if he would do things differently, doesn't ask him if there was any like internal pushback, like did Pfizer break the law, doesn't ask for any of that shit, which is another brazen lie.
Yep, 100%. And yeah, you're right. Joe didn't even ask Donald Trump about that after beating the vaccine drum for 3 freaking years straight, talking about ivermectin every single day, bitching and moaning every time anyone in the media criticized you or called out your bullshit. Then you get the freaking guy who did the vaccine, who authorized Operation Warp Speed, who did not fire Dr. Fauci. You're sitting across the table from him, and not once in a 3-hour conversation does it come up.
Their cases crumbled. There was over 60 cases. Most of them didn't even have standing because it was so preposterous and so absurd. When Rudy Giuliani got in front of a judge to try to make the case the election was fraudulent, he literally said, we're not alleging fraud, because he knows they can't do it. The 2000 Mules documentary, which was the Dinesh D'Souza attempt to prove that the 2020 election was stolen, Dinesh D'Souza just had to come out and issue an apology and admit that his whole thing was fucking bullshit. This just happened the other day. Now, is Joe going to talk about this at any extended length? Remember when he came out after the election when Trump won and he was like, oh, it turns out voting works. Yeah, you don't say. So you're admitting Trump lied to your face, and that didn't change your view of him and your estimation of him. That didn't change your endorsement of him. Look, can we be honest here? The fact is, when Trump lied...
And by the way, Brian, I would have agreed with this at one point, but I kind of disagree with it now because, as I just mentioned, Joe had Trump on his podcast and didn't even bring up COVID once. He didn't interrogate Donald Trump at all, and he didn't challenge Donald Trump on the way that Donald Trump handled the pandemic. Again, guys, Joe Biden is the president who said COVID is over. Joe Biden's the one that never oversaw a day of lockdowns in his life as president. Trump presided over all the lockdowns, all the mask mandates, and Operation Warp Speed. So, Brian, I at one point I might have agreed with you, but I don't even think Joe Rogan cares about COVID. Because if you deeply cared about something, you would at least ask Donald Trump. You might be afraid to truly challenge him. You know, you might get stage fright and pussy out, but you'd at least bring it up. You'd at least pretend to give a shit. He didn't. So I really do think it's just for Rogan about the UFC, his friendship with Dana White, and wanting to hang out with other rich assholes. I think, honestly, at this point, the only way to quote-unquote get Joe Rogan back on our side or whatever is if we nominated some person that was like twice as rich as Donald Trump and like twice as big. You know what I'm saying? Like literally, physically, like it's just someone that could tower over. Then Joe Rogan might just be like, oh, big man, I follow the big rich man, and come back to our side. But in lieu of that, you're not going to be able to argue him out of this bullshit position. No amount of hypocrisy, Bernie, no amount of logic and explanation is going to change him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what it really comes down to, you're totally right, is it's about comfort for Joe, right? For a guy who loves to be like, I think everybody's too comfortable, right? I just live on my, $30 million compound in Austin, Texas, but I make sure I know how to be uncomfortable. I stay and make myself uncomfortable, right? But what he really does is he just wants a bunch of people to suck him off, a bunch of people to validate him, a bunch of people that fawn over him and uplift him. And the Republican Party makes him feel at home. A Republican Party that has no shame, that has no standard, and will grovel and uplift anyone. They will go to any end of the earth for popularity, and that makes sense to Joe Rogan, right? Because it's all about growth. It's like the pernicious growth mentality that infects all of corporate America. Every Fortune 500 CEO is prepared to do all kinds of depravity in order to make next year's numbers, this much higher than they were last quarter, right? You know what I'm saying?